Okay, so I wrote all my answers down, so I'm going to be reading off of them. But for the first one, for misconceptions, a misconception is when a student understands something in the wrong way, or thinks of something in a way other than what it actually is. One common science misconception is the beach sand interview that I did with one of my third graders. Sometimes students can have a weak understanding of how sea formations are formed. And according to our modules on Canvas, some other misconceptions are that humans are not animals and that trees are only considered plants when they are small. And then the second question, please explain how you will leverage students' misconceptions of common science phenomena in your future classroom to help teach those students. I wrote, to help teach students about their misconceptions, teachers should help students explore those misconceptions and then correct it. Misconceptions are important because people learn best when they correct their mistaken thoughts. So taking their mistaken thoughts and building on them to have them form in the right way. And then the second one, progression of standards. For the first one, I wrote, the progression of standards offers teachers the ability to build upon a DCI over many years. It can be used because that means that students will never stop learning from the standard as years go on because it's constantly being built on, which I remember we talked about in our last class with Dustin. And then the second question, the fifth grade teacher role. I wrote down, as a fifth grade teacher teaching the 5 PS13 matter and its interaction standard, I will be focusing on making observations and measurements to identify materials based on their properties. And before fifth grade, with this standard, students should at least know the vocabulary, or at least some of the vocabulary surrounding this standard. Students should also be able to build on carrying out investigations to answer questions in grades 3 through 5 because of their similar experiences in grades K through 2. And it continues to include controlled variables and having students provide evidence in their science experiments. After my grade, students should be able to progress on this standard of learning and ask themselves deeper questions in order to expand on their learning. Okay, and then the 5E learning cycle one. So I actually just wrote down like all of them, and then I'll go back and do the examples. So, and they're not in order. But for engage, I wrote down this is for, and I got all of this from our Kahoot on the last day of class. So for the engage, that's really for a student or for teachers to like check on students' prior knowledge and like maybe hear about some of their misconceptions that they might have about the subject that we're doing. And then it's also to like get students curious about whatever they are learning about. So like when we were asking our students about fingerprints for our lesson plan, we just kind of just started asking them general questions, whether they knew about it, to kind of get them excited about it. And then explore. This is to give students a chance to investigate with concrete materials and to communicate observations with their peers. So I know like a lot of times in the 5E lesson plans that we saw in our like class this semester, there's a lot of like group projects and group exploring, so they're communicating with each other what they are learning through that exploring process. And then I kind of skipped around. For elaborate, this is to extend students' conceptual understanding and allows them to practice skills and behaviors. And then for explain, students will use data and scientific knowledge to generate explanations, and this is also when the teacher would introduce vocab. So one of the times I really remember the teacher introducing vocab in our class this semester was when Maddie was actually like trying to get it out of us rather than her just telling us the vocab words right away. She was having us come to that conclusion rather than just putting the vocab words up on the board. And then for elaborate, this is to encourage learners to assess their understandings, evaluate. encourage students to assess their understanding and abilities. Also lets teachers evaluate students' understanding of key concepts of the lessons. Okay, and then for the example of each E, I actually went to like my science standard my science lesson that I did for my 3rd grade classroom in my practicum, and we were doing, like I said, a lesson plan on fingerprints. So I'll kind of explain that. Our engagement activity, like I said, was just asking them different questions about fingerprints, like what are they, where are they, why are they important, what do you need from them. And it's actually kind of funny because we didn't think that the 3rd graders knew much about it, and we did know a lot about it. And then we found out later that the other 3rd grade classroom had done that same science activity the day before, so they kind of knew all the answers. And then our exploration activity was actually having them shade their own prints to see what their own fingerprint looked like. So we passed around papers and pencils, and they would color on one sheet and then push their fingerprints down, and then color on, or push their other fingerprint on another sheet that had a hand, and they would be printing it down on the correct fingerprint, finger for the fingerprint. And then our explanation was asking students about the different patterns that they noticed. We kind of had them do this in a group first and then share as a whole. And then what does each person's fingerprint look like? What categories could we place them in? And this is also when we introduced the vocab. So our teacher had 3 sheets with the different types of fingerprints, and we asked them what they looked like, and they actually were able to come up with all of the actual names of each fingerprint, which was kind of nice because then it wasn't us just telling them exactly what each fingerprint was. And then our elaboration activity was having the students pick one finger as a class. So we asked them which finger they wanted to choose as a class, and they had to figure out what type of fingerprint they had based on the fingerprints that we had just showed them, and then come up to the board and mark, tally which type of fingerprint they had. And so we were able to kind of compare the whole class's type of fingerprints together. But also they were able to compare their fingerprints with people at their table too before going up. And then our evaluation at the bottom of our lesson plan, we had 2 assessments, and one of them was just whether or not students can identify the fingerprint types and be able to tell the difference between them. So kind of how they were going up to the board and being able to tell that they had a loop rather than an arch. And then the second assessment is that students are creating their own fingerprints and can compare them to other students' fingerprints. So just when they're at their table and they're kind of noticing that their fingerprints go more in a circle and their table partners are going more up into an arch. Just being able to see those without really any explanation. And then the engineering design process, this might be totally wrong. But I wrote down that the engineering design process helps foster engineering and technology literacy among students. Engineering in elementary has created research-based classroom and standard-tested lessons that involve engineering and technology within the elementary topics. And I wrote down that examples of this is happening within the they can be found under the science and engineering practices tab or the cross-cutting concept tab. So that's when we're seeing those different examples occur. And then I wrote for the deeper understanding of it. Students are having a deeper learning during this process because it's tying the multiple areas of content to help the students grasp the information more. They have more to kind of tie it to. And then it also provides real world examples that help students make sense of the concept, so they have more of real life situations rather than atoms that they'd never be able to see. They would be able to kind of use those science and technology concepts to make something that they would probably see in their real life. And then feedback, I felt the most helpful was the 2 5E lesson plans that we had to make. I'm honestly still very nervous about creating and teaching a 5E lesson plan to my classes, but just the fact that I was able to make 2 this semester and teach them and kind of have that under my belt makes me feel a little bit less nervous. But I also felt it was helpful because I always think that just practicing things over and over again helps everyone get better at it. So I think that was really helpful that we had multiple chances to do that. And then I felt like the least impactful was probably just the concept map and the foldable. I felt like it just kind of felt like busy work. I honestly think that we could have like explained that to our students without ever having to do it ourselves. I mean, I feel like as college students we all kind of know what those are, so having to do it in class when we could be working on something else, when we all kind of already know how to explain it, I feel like was just not the best use of time. But yeah, I think that's all I wrote. But yeah, thanks for a good semester.